Humanity had always been seen as fragile and weak, a species destined to fade into obscurity. But in the shadows of Earth's forgotten past, something far more dangerous than anyone realized was waiting to rise. The stars had written humanity off, assuming their history of war and survival had made them too broken to fight back. Yet beneath the surface, a primal force and ancient rage stirred. When the alien invaders came, they believed they would crush humanity without resistance. What they didn't anticipate was the birth of the Deathworlder, a force that would turn their arrogance into terror. The stars hung cold and distant in the void of space, observing the fragile blue sphere that had long been humanity's home. For centuries, Earth had teetered on the brink of collapse. Endless wars, catastrophic environmental shifts, and internal strife had defined humanity's story. To the galaxies beyond, it seemed like just another doomed world. The records of countless civilizations described humanity as little more than a weak and fractured species destined for extinction. Their lack of unity, the constant internal battles, and their seemingly endless struggle for survival painted a grim picture of a people too divided to endure. In the grand tapestry of the cosmos, Earth had become little more than a forgotten fragment. The beings who watched from afar saw humans as creatures of limited potential survivors clinging desperately to existence, doomed by their own nature. They did not see a unified force, a people who could rise above their own conflicts and reclaim their destiny. To them, humanity was a reflection of their world, chaotic, broken, and unworthy of the attention of more advanced species. They dismissed Earth as nothing more than a battlefield of limited significance, a world of fractured hopes and failed dreams. Humanity had once been powerful, a species capable of great achievements, but those days were long past. The ruins of once great cities bore silent testimony to the battles fought and lost, leaving behind only echoes of their former glory. The invaders had seen these ruins and had formed their conclusions. They believed humanity's decline was inevitable, a result of their own weakness and inability to adapt. The invaders, hardened and ruthless beings from beyond, saw Earth as nothing more than a shell of what it once was. Their eyes saw a species that had lost its potential, reduced to scraps by their own failures. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent decline, something deeper lingered. The invaders failed to understand that survival wasn't merely about numbers or strength. It was about resilience, adaptability, and an ancient, often dormant, force buried in the hearts of those who had faced the harshest trials. Humanity had always thrived on adversity, even when it appeared they had reached their limits. It was this very persistence that had allowed them to endure long after others would have perished. The observers in the stars failed to grasp this. They saw only weakness, but they didn't see the fire that smoldered beneath the surface. It was not a fire of strength in the conventional sense. It was not physical power or overwhelming numbers that defined humanity. Instead, it was something far more dangerous, something forged in the crucible of Earth's unforgiving landscapes. They had always lived on the edge of destruction, and in their darkest moments, they had adapted in ways no other species could. They had clawed their way through centuries of conflict and catastrophe, each act of survival strengthening a force that the invaders couldn't comprehend. Humanity's resilience wasn't built on hope alone, it was built on the reality of their brutal world, where only those who refused to surrender truly survived. The invaders saw no worth in humanity beyond what they had already claimed. They had judged them by their past failures, unable to see the potential for something far greater hidden beneath the surface. They had erased civilizations, wiped out entire cities, and reduced humanity to mere remnants. And yet, the invaders couldn't understand that what remained wasn't weakness. It was the foundation of something ancient and primal. They thought they had extinguished humanity's last flicker, but they would soon come to realize just how wrong they were. The arrival of the invaders was swift and merciless. Their ships blotted out the sun, casting long shadows over the ruined landscapes below. Massive vessels, sleek and deadly, loomed in Earth's atmosphere like predators surveying their prey. They came not as seekers of knowledge or explorers, but as conquerors, driven by an unwavering thirst for dominance. The human resistance, battered and fractured, had little time to react. Cities once vibrant and teeming with life now lay in smoking ruins, their inhabitants either vanished or reduced to ashes. The invaders moved with ruthless efficiency, eliminating entire populations in their quest for submission. At first, there was no hope of defense. The humans had long since lost faith in their ability to stand against the overwhelming tide of an intergalactic force far beyond their reach. The invaders were warriors born of harsh worlds, species hardened by millennia of survival. They were the apex of their own civilizations, and they saw humanity as little more than remnants of a dying species. To them, Earth was an easy conquest. They saw no need to negotiate, no reason to consider anything beyond their own desires. Human cities fell like leaves to the ground, reduced to rubble beneath the weight of alien weapons. But it wasn't just the physical destruction they left behind. The invaders carried with them an aura of certainty, a belief in their own superiority that left no room for doubt. They considered humanity weak, incapable of resistance. They didn't recognize the fire that smoldered beneath the surface, the primal will to survive that had been buried beneath centuries of conflict and despair. To them, humanity was a broken and fractured race, unable to mount any meaningful resistance. The invaders saw only weakness, dismissing the notion of a species that could ever rise to meet their challenge. Yet in their arrogance, they overlooked something crucial, something far more dangerous than they could have anticipated. Humans had always thrived in adversity. It was a truth older than recorded history, a truth etched into the bones of the world itself. Humanity had faced extinction before through war, through environmental collapse, through unimaginable suffering, and yet they had always endured. The invaders failed to understand that survival wasn't defined by strength alone, but by an unrelenting refusal to be broken. They didn't grasp the deep well of resilience that had shaped humanity, one that had grown stronger in the face of annihilation. The invaders' technology was far superior, their weapons more advanced than anything humanity had ever conceived. Yet no amount of technology could account for the primal force that had shaped Earth's people. The invaders believed in their superiority so deeply that they had no need for caution. They didn't realize that their weapons could destroy cities, but they couldn't destroy a people who had evolved in the crucible of a death world, a world where only the strongest and most adaptable survived. The humans they had reduced to rubble were not weaklings, as they assumed, but survivors molded by generations of hardship. Humanity wasn't a species that bowed to threats. They had learned to endure not because of some inherent strength, but because of their unyielding will to survive. The invaders had erased their cities and slaughtered their people, but they had not understood that what remained were not remnants of a once great civilization, but something far more dangerous, something they would soon come to fear. The invaders saw no reason to stop or reconsider, believing their conquest would be swift and unquestioned. But their ignorance would cost them more than they could have imagined. The myth of the Deathworlder had long been dismissed by those who observed humanity from the stars. To the invaders, it was nothing more than a fantasy born of desperation, a relic of a fractured and fading race, clinging to delusions of grandeur. The very idea that humans could rise from the depths of their own weakness and become something far greater was laughable to them. They saw humanity as a species weakened by centuries of war, environmental collapse, and internal strife. To them, their world was a dying one, its people destined to be overwhelmed by superior forces from beyond. The legend of the Deathworlder had emerged from the darkest chapters of human history, tales of individuals who had survived the most brutal environments Earth had to offer. These were not merely survivors in the conventional sense, they were something far more dangerous. The Deathworlder was born not from strength, but from an unrelenting drive to endure. They had lived through disasters that would have annihilated any other species, and yet they had persisted. Their existence wasn't a story of conquest, but of defiance. It was the resilience forged by a world that seemed determined to destroy itself. The invaders scoffed at the idea. They saw Earth as nothing more than a world where life had always struggled but failed. In their minds, humanity had been shaped by violence, isolation, and endless wars that consumed them from within. The notion of a Deathworlder, a being capable of rising above such challenges, seemed laughable, born of myth and desperation. To them, humans had already lost their potential long ago. What remained in their eyes was a race clinging to survival, too weak to resist the inevitability of their extinction. But the invaders had failed to understand the essence of humanity. They had no concept of what a Deathworlder truly represented. The harsh environments of Earth had never just bred weakness, they had forged individuals capable of something far beyond mere survival. The Deathworlder was not a warrior born of strength, but one forged by the relentless forces of a world that demanded adaptability. These beings had survived the unthinkable, not because of brute force, but because of their ability to endure, always evolving, always adapting. The invaders saw humanity's history of war and division and dismissed any notion of unity. They had no understanding of how that very adversity had shaped the Deathworlder. Humanity's past conflicts were not weaknesses as they believed, but proof of their survival. The Deathworlders were the product of a species that had learned to thrive in the face of annihilation, adapting in ways no other species could. They were not strong in the conventional sense, but they were resilient in a way that the invaders could never comprehend. The invaders' arrogance blinded them. They saw only the fractured humanity, the remnants of a civilization crumbling under the weight of their conquest. They dismissed the idea of a Deathworlder as fantasy, as desperation clung to a dying species. But the humans they sought to dominate weren't the weaklings they assumed. They were survivors shaped by forces far greater than the invaders could ever understand. The Deathworlder wasn't a myth, it was a reality born from the harshness of Earth itself. And soon, the invaders would come to realize just how deadly that reality could be. In the quiet corners of a broken world, they emerged scarred by the harshness of existence, shaped by centuries of struggle and suffering. These were the Deathworlders, individuals who had survived the most brutal and unforgiving environments that Earth had to offer. They were not warriors in the traditional sense, nor were they soldiers in the grand schemes of conquest. Instead, they were something far more dangerous, beings forged by the relentless forces of their world, hardened by survival itself. To the invaders, who viewed humanity as weak and fractured, they were nothing more than remnants of a dying species, incapable of resistance. But they would soon learn how dangerous such assumptions could be. The Deathworlders had lived through catastrophe after catastrophe. Some had endured in the radioactive wastelands, others in the frozen tundra, where life seemed impossible. They had survived the collapse of civilizations, the relentless rise and fall of empires, and the unyielding forces of nature that had sought to erase humanity from existence. What had been left in their wake were not ordinary survivors, but something deeper, something born of necessity and desperation. They were survivors not because they were stronger, but because they had adapted in ways no one else could. They had become a force shaped by their world, something primal and untamed. To the invaders, these humans were nothing more than relics of a broken past. They had watched humanity's endless wars and internal strife, and from their distant vantage point they had seen only weakness. To the beings who had conquered countless worlds, humanity was just another species on the brink of extinction, too divided and too weak to rise to the challenge of spacefaring conquerors. They saw no potential in humanity beyond what they had already claimed. The myth of the Deathworlder was dismissed as a story of desperation, a remnant of a people who had long since lost their way. But they were wrong. The Deathworlders weren't defined by their past failures. They were shaped by their world's harshest environments, but they had never been broken by them. In fact, they had risen above them, finding ways to survive and thrive when others would have perished. They had been shaped by struggle, not destroyed by it. The invaders, in their arrogance, had dismissed this resilience, thinking humanity's decline had been inevitable. They believed Earth's harsh conditions had reduced its inhabitants to a primitive state, a species unable to rise beyond their own limitations. But the Deathworlders weren't limited by the same rules the invaders had set. They weren't shaped by brute strength alone. They were survivors, yes, but they were more than that. They were forces of nature, born of necessity, capable of thriving in the face of annihilation. The invaders' mistake was believing that humanity had been permanently weakened by their past. What they failed to realize was that humanity's history of struggle had forged a different kind of strength, one rooted not in numbers, but in resilience. The Deathworlders didn't fight with the precision or technology the invaders wielded. They didn't fight with the same structure or strategy. Instead, they fought with something far more primal, something the invaders could never anticipate, an unrelenting will to survive. They were not warriors as the invaders knew them. They were something darker, something older, and something far more dangerous. The invaders had dismissed humanity as a species that had lost its potential, but they were about to discover just how wrong they had been. The spark that had long lain dormant within humanity now flickered to life. It wasn't a sudden blaze of fire, but a quiet, simmering intensity that had been buried beneath the weight of centuries of struggle. The Deathworlder wasn't born from strength in the conventional sense, but from something far more primal: rage. It was not a rage born of hatred or violence, but a fury rooted deep in humanity's refusal to be extinguished. For the invaders, who had come to Earth expecting nothing more than a species destined for extinction, this was something far beyond their comprehension. The man who first carried this rage wasn't a warrior, not in the traditional sense. He had been one of countless survivors, one of the forgotten remnants of humanity's past. His world had been shaped by chaos, surviving in the harshest of conditions, adapting to the ever-changing horrors of his world. His people had been torn apart by war, torn apart by greed and fear, and yet he had endured. But he was not strong in the way the invaders had come to expect. He was not built of the same metal or fueled by the same fire as they had envisioned. His strength came from something far deeper, far darker than they could understand. It was the strength of a species that had been shaped by death itself. When the invaders came, he was a shadow of a man broken by the same world that had forged him. He had watched his people fall, watched their cities crumble, their families vanish. But it wasn't his fear that defined him, it was his refusal to let that fear define his existence. He had lived through the horrors of Earth and had seen humanity not as weak, but as a species that had always found a way to endure. The invaders had eradicated entire cities, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake, yet they hadn't eradicated his spirit. They hadn't erased the primal force that pulsed within him. It wasn't a strength he carried in his fists or his weapons. It was a force far more ancient, a rage born of centuries of struggle, of survival against all odds. When he rose, it wasn't with the precision of trained soldiers or the advanced weaponry the invaders wielded. It was with a feral, untamed fury, one that could not be quantified or controlled. The invaders had believed humanity to be a species divided and broken, incapable of unity or resistance. They had dismissed the whispers of a Deathworlder as myth, something born of desperation. What they failed to realize was that the myth wasn't just a story, it was a reality forged from the very fabric of humanity's existence. The man who carried this rage wasn't a savior, but he was something far more dangerous. He was a force of nature shaped by the relentless forces of Earth, by the endless cycles of destruction and renewal. The invaders had slaughtered countless humans, believing them to be weak. They thought they had extinguished the last flicker of resistance, but they hadn't. What they had done was awaken something far more primal, a Deathworlder who no longer fought for survival, but for something far greater. His rage was not about survival, it was about vengeance, about reclaiming what had always been taken from him and his people. The invaders had made a fatal mistake in believing humanity could be extinguished so easily. They had judged the survivors of Earth by their past, by their internal conflicts, by their wars and failures. But they had not understood the deeper truth, the truth that humanity's greatest strength wasn't found in their technological might, but in their refusal to be broken. The man who carried this rage wasn't fighting for hope or survival. He was fighting for something far older, something the invaders couldn't grasp. And as he rose, the invaders would soon learn the cost of underestimating a species they believed had already fallen. The invaders, in their confidence and certainty of victory, had overlooked the most dangerous truth about humanity, that it wasn't just survival that had defined them, but their ability to endure. The Deathworlders were not a relic of a bygone era, but a force that had always lurked beneath the surface, waiting to rise when their people were pushed to the edge. The invaders, blinded by their own superiority and disdain for a weakened species, had dismissed the notion of resistance, believing they had already subdued humanity. But the man who carried the rage wasn't alone. His fire had been reignited, not by the need to fight, but by something far deeper, by the need to prove the invaders wrong. The Deathworlders weren't a mythical breed of humans. They were real, born of a species that had always existed in the shadows of annihilation. They had survived the cataclysms of their own world, emerging from the wreckage stronger than before. And now they had returned, no longer shackled by the chains of their past, but driven by a fury that no invader could extinguish. It wasn't just one man who carried this rage. He was only the spark, one of many who had emerged from the broken remnants of humanity. As the invaders pushed further into Earth, they began to encounter others like him, individuals who had adapted in ways beyond their understanding. These Deathworlders were not concerned with the fall of their world or the loss of their past. They were focused on something more primal: survival and the primal need to strike back at those who had sought to erase them. The invaders thought humanity was too fractured, too divided by history and conflict, to unite in any meaningful way, but they were wrong. What had appeared as weakness and division was in fact a strength born of necessity. The Deathworlders didn't need unity in the traditional sense. They were bound by a common rage, a shared refusal to be crushed by forces greater than them. The invaders had stripped away their cities, destroyed their institutions, and eradicated their numbers, but they had never managed to erase what truly defined humanity: its ability to rise from the ashes and strike back when least expected. The invaders had built their empires on the belief that humanity was destined for destruction. They believed their superior technology, their ruthlessness, and their brutal tactics would ensure their victory. But they failed to comprehend that it wasn't technology, power, or numbers that had defined humanity's resilience. It was something far more fundamental. The invaders had relied on their dominance, assuming their technological edge would ensure control. But humanity wasn't defined by their weakness. They were defined by their relentless will to survive. The Deathworlders had no allegiance to their past governments, no loyalty to the fallen empires of humanity. They were free from the chains that had once bound them. They didn't seek glory or conquest. They sought only to survive. The invaders believed humanity had been reduced to scattered remnants, unable to mount any meaningful resistance. But they were wrong. What remained was a species shaped by a world that had always demanded more than survival. It demanded adaptation. As the invaders clashed with these Deathworlders, they began to understand the true cost of their arrogance. They had dismissed humanity as a species doomed to fade into obscurity, but what they had encountered was something far more dangerous. Not warriors, not heroes, but something far more primal: a species forged by the fires of a world that refused to let them perish. The invaders would soon learn that they had underestimated a species they believed had already died. As the battle raged across Earth, the invaders began to realize the depth of their error. Their once unshakable belief in their own superiority was crumbling. They had assumed humanity was fractured beyond repair, a people too divided by centuries of conflict to ever rise against them. But the Deathworlders weren't bound by the failures of the past. They had moved beyond the divisions that had once plagued humanity. They fought not as individuals, but as a collective force driven by an ancient and unrelenting fury. The invaders had conquered countless worlds, each more advanced than the last. They had seen species rise and fall, civilizations crumble beneath their might. But humanity was different. They weren't a people who clung to the past, who mourned what had been lost. They were a species that adapted, evolving with each new trial. The invaders had misjudged their tenacity, their resilience. They had thought humanity's history of destruction had left them weakened and scattered. But what they failed to see was that those very struggles had forged a strength far greater than they could comprehend. The battle wasn't one of technological superiority or overwhelming force. The invaders, armed with advanced weapons and ruthless tactics, were far beyond what humanity had once imagined possible. But they had underestimated the Deathworlders, their rage, their primal need to survive, and their unwillingness to be crushed by the same forces that had tried to destroy them before. The humans they had dismissed as remnants of a dying race were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting to reclaim what had been taken from them. They weren't driven by hope, but by a fierce, primal desire to resist and overcome. The invaders had eradicated cities, obliterated populations, and thought they had wiped away any remnants of humanity's past. But what they encountered instead were beings who had long since moved beyond their shattered worlds, who no longer feared extinction. These Deathworlders weren't warriors of the past, bound by old loyalties or the failed empires of humanity's past. They were something new, a force that had emerged from the ashes of their broken world, no longer confined by the failures that had once plagued them. What the invaders faced was something ancient, something born not from the ruins of a crumbling civilization, but from the very essence of humanity itself. They had expected to dominate a species weakened by their own conflicts, but instead, they found themselves up against something far more dangerous, a people who had become masters of their own destruction. The invaders had thought they could erase humanity's past and leave nothing in their wake. They didn't understand that humanity wasn't defined by what they had lost, but by what they had survived. As the battle intensified, the invaders began to realize the full extent of their mistake. The Deathworlders weren't interested in conquest or reclaiming what had been lost. They were interested in survival and survival alone. They fought not with advanced technology or overwhelming numbers, but with a primal rage born of centuries of struggle and an unrelenting will to endure. The invaders, in their hubris, had failed to see the true danger of humanity, their adaptability, their resilience, and their refusal to be extinguished. The invaders would soon understand the true cost of underestimating a species that had always risen from the ashes. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizons stories for more thrilling tales of science fiction and adventure.